The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the billionaire's face as he stared at the waitress's wrist, his champagne glass slipping from trembling fingers. "Sir, my mom has the same ring," she said innocently, unaware she'd just shattered 20 years of carefully constructed lies. In that moment, Alistair Sterling's knees buckled his body, crashing to the marble floor, as the entire restaurant froze in horror. Those 7 words would resurrect the dead, expose a conspiracy worth billions, and reunite a family torn apart by greed. Welcome to a story where a simple observation changes everything. I invite you to follow this tale to its end, and please comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The rain hammered against the towering windows of Le Bernardin's private dining room, each droplet racing down the glass like tears on a mourner's cheek. October in Manhattan always carried a particular melancholy. But tonight, the storm seemed personal, as if the sky itself grieved alongside Alistair Sterling. He sat alone at a table set for 2, his fingers tracing the rim of an untouched champagne flute. The other place setting pristine silverware, folded napkin, empty chair, had been prepared exactly as he'd requested. 20 years. 20 years of this ritual dining alone on October 15th, the anniversary of Liana's death. "Mr. Sterling," a gentle voice pierced through his reverie. "Would you like me to pour the champagne now?" Alistair looked up, his steel-gray eyes focusing on the young waitress standing beside him. She couldn't have been older than 21, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes the color of summer honey. Her name tag read Ilara, and despite her modest uniform, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded him painfully of "yes," he said, his voice rough with disuse. He'd barely spoken to anyone all day, canceling meetings, ignoring calls from board members. Julian, his cousin and business partner, had tried 3 times to reach him, but Alistair couldn't bear the thought of sympathy, especially not today. Ilara moved with practiced grace, tilting the bottle at the perfect angle. The champagne. Liana's favorite, a 1996 Dom Perignon, sparkled as it filled the glass. As she poured something, caught the light, a glint of silver on her wrist. Alistair's breath hitched. "Your bracelet," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Ilara paused, glancing down at her wrist. "Oh, this I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I know we're not supposed to wear jewelry, but it was my mother's and she insisted I never take it off. I can remove it if—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. Alistair's hand trembled as he reached toward her wrist, stopping just short of touching. May I see it?" Confused but compliant, Ilara extended her arm. The bracelet was simple, a silver chain with a small charm, a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide, tiny rubies serving as its eyes. The room spun. Alistair gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "It's my mother's," Ilara replied, concern creeping into her tone. "She's had it as long as I can remember. She says someone special gave it to her, though she can't remember who. She has memory problems from an accident years ago." She tilted her head, studying his pale face. "Are you all right, Mr. Sterling? Your mother," he managed. "What's her name?" "Amelia. Amelia Vance." Ilara's brow furrowed. "Sir, you're scaring me. Should I call someone?" But Alistair wasn't listening anymore. His mind raced back 20 years to the day he'd designed that phoenix charm. One of a kind, he'd told the jeweler. For his phoenix, his Liana, who'd risen from the ashes of a broken childhood to become the light of his life. He'd given her the bracelet on their 5th wedding anniversary, 3 months before the accident. The accident. The fire. The body burned beyond recognition, identified only by dental records. The closed casket funeral where he'd buried his heart, along with his wife and unborn child. "Sir, my mom has the same ring," Alara said, misunderstanding his fixation, pointing to the engagement ring on his finger, a matching phoenix design he'd never removed. The words hit him like a physical blow. The room tilted violently, darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. He heard Alara's alarmed cry, felt the champagne glass shatter against the marble floor. And then nothing. Consciousness returned in fragments. Voices, lights too bright, the antiseptic smell of a hospital. Alistair's eyes fluttered open to find himself in a private room at Mount Sinai Machines, beeping steadily beside him. "Thank God," a familiar voice said. Julian stood at the foot of the bed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "You gave us quite a scare, cousin." "How long?" Alistair's throat felt like sandpaper. 6 hours. The doctors said it was a vasovagal syncope. Basically, you fainted from shock. That poor waitress was beside herself. She's been in the waiting room this whole time, insisted on staying until you woke up. "Alara." The name came out as a breath. "I need to see her." Julian's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Alistair, you need rest. Whatever happened, get her, now." Something in his tone must have conveyed the urgency, because Julian nodded and left the room. Minutes later, Alara appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with worry. "Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I did." "You did nothing wrong," he interrupted, gesturing for her to come closer. "Alara, I need you to tell me everything about your mother, everything." She perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What do you want to know? Start from the beginning. Her accident, her memories, anything she's told you about her past." Alara took a deep breath. "I don't know much. Mom says her memories begin about 20 years ago. She woke up in a small hospital in Vermont with no identification, pregnant, and no memory of who she was or how she got there. The doctors said she'd been in some kind of accident, burns on her arms, smoke inhalation. They thought maybe a house fire." Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. "Vermont. Do you know which hospital?" "Mercy General, I think. It closed down about 10 years ago." Alara twisted the phoenix bracelet unconsciously. "The staff there was kind to her. One nurse, Margaret, basically adopted her, helped her get on her feet. Mom chose the name Amelia because it was the first name she saw on a book in the hospital library. Vance was Margaret's last name." "And you were born June 3rd, 2005, about 7 months after Mom woke up." Alara's eyes searched his face. "Mr. Sterling, why are you asking me this? Do you know my mother?" Before he could answer, the door burst open. Julian strode in his face, a mask of concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Alistair, I really must insist you rest. Miss Vance, I think it's best if you—" "She stays," Alistair said firmly. He turned back to Alara. "Your mother, does she have any distinguishing marks? Scars, birthmarks?" Alara nodded slowly. "A birthmark on her left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. She jokes that it's the only thing from her past that stayed with her." The room went silent except for the steady beep of monitors. Alistair closed his eyes, remembering countless mornings tracing that exact birthmark with his fingertips. Liana laughing and saying it was her lucky moon. "Mr. Sterling." Alara's voice was small, uncertain. He opened his eyes, meeting her honey-colored gaze, Liana's eyes. How had he not seen it immediately? "I need to meet your mother." "That's not possible," Julian interjected quickly. "Alistair, you're clearly having some kind of episode. This girl's mother is nobody, just some woman with memory loss. You're projecting your grief. Get out." Julian blinked. "Excuse me." Get out of this room, Julian, now. His cousin's jaw tightened, but he left the door clicking shut with finality. Alistair turned back to Alara, whose face had gone pale. I'm sorry for my cousin. He's protective. Alara, what I'm about to tell you might sound impossible, but I need you to listen. She nodded, fingers white-knuckled around the chair arms. 20 years ago, my wife Liana was traveling to Vermont to visit her sister. She was 5 months pregnant with our first child. Her car was found burned at the bottom of a ravine. She was presumed dead. The body was unrecognizable. He paused, struggling with words he'd never spoken aloud. That phoenix bracelet your mother wears, I designed it. There's only one in existence. I gave it to Liana 3 months before she died. Alara's hand flew to her mouth. You think my mother is your wife? I don't know what I think, Alistair admitted. But that bracelet, the timing, the location, the pregnancy. He reached for his phone with shaking hands. I have pictures. Would you look at them? She nodded, moving closer as he scrolled through his phone. He'd digitized all the old photos years ago, unable to bear physical albums, but equally unable to delete her memory. His finger hovered over a folder labeled simply L. The first photo made Alara gasp. It was from their wedding day, Liana, in a simple white dress, laughing as confetti rained down around her. Her auburn hair caught the sunlight. Her honey eyes sparkled with joy, and on her wrist, clearly visible, was the phoenix bracelet. She looks... Alara couldn't finish the sentence. Like you, Alistair said quietly. Or rather, you look like her. They scrolled through more photos. Liana at charity galas. Liana painting in her studio. Liana curled up on their couch, reading, her hand resting on her growing belly. In every image, the resemblance to Alara became more undeniable. This can't be real, Alara whispered. Mom would remember something. She would know. Head trauma can cause complete amnesia. Alistair said, his mind racing through possibilities. If she was thrown from the car before it burned, if someone found her and got her to a hospital. But why wouldn't they contact me? Why wasn't she listed as a Jane Doe? Why did everyone believe she was dead? His phone rang, startling them both. Julian's name flashed on the screen. Alistair declined the call, but it rang again immediately. I should go, Alara said, standing abruptly. This is too much. I need to think. Wait. Alistair struggled to sit up fully. Please, could you bring your mother here just to meet? If I'm wrong, I'll never bother you again. But if I'm right... Alara looked at him, but for a long moment. This broken billionaire who might be her father, who might have been mourning them for 20 years, while they lived just miles away. I'll ask her, she said finally. But Mr. Sterling, if this is true, if she is your wife, why would someone want her dead? And why would they go to such lengths to make you believe she was... The question hung in the air like a blade. Alistair had no answer, but a cold dread was building in his chest. Because Alara was right, if Liana was alive, if she'd been hidden away all these years, it wasn't an accident. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had stolen 20 years of their lives, and he was going to find out who. The next morning arrived gray and subdued, matching the atmosphere in the Sterling Towers executive conference room. Alistair had checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice driven by a desperate need for answers. He'd spent the night poring over old police reports, insurance documents, anything related to Liana's death. You look terrible, Grace Chen, his chief legal counsel, said as she entered the room carrying a stack of files. Julian said you collapsed at dinner. I'm fine, Alistair didn't look up from the accident report he'd read 100 times before. Grace, I need you to pull everything from October 2004. Every document, every transaction, every phone record. She set down her files carefully. Alistair, that was 20 years ago. Most of those records would be archived if they exist at all. What's this about? He finally met her eyes. I have reason to believe Liana might be alive. Grace's professional composure cracked. That's Alistair, the body, the funeral. The body was burned beyond recognition. Dental records can be falsified. Grace, I need you to trust me on this. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. What do you need? Everything. Start with the insurance payout. $10 million if I remember correctly. Who handled the claim? Who verified the identity? Who signed off on the death certificate? Grace pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. I'll need a few hours to gather everything. Alistair, if you're right about this. If I'm right, someone murdered my wife. Or tried to. The door opened and Julian walked in uninvited, his expression stormy. This needs to stop. What needs to stop? Alistair's voice was dangerously quiet. This fantasy you're constructing. I've been fielding calls all morning. The staff at Le Bernardin, the hospital board, everyone's concerned about your mental state. And now I hear you're demanding 20-year-old records. Since when do you monitor my requests to legal? Julian's jaw tightened. Since you started chasing ghosts. Alistair, I loved Liana too. She was family. But she's gone, and this obsession with that waitress, her name is Alara, is unhealthy. You need help, cousin. Real help. Not some conspiracy theory about your dead wife. Alistair stood slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over his cousin. Julian, I'm going to ask you once. Did you have anything to do with Liana's accident? The color drained from Julian's face. How dare you? Answer the question. Of course not. God, Alistair, what's wrong with you? I was the one who identified the body when you couldn't. I was the one who handled the funeral arrangements, who kept the company running while you fell apart. And this is how you repay me with accusations. Grace cleared her throat. Perhaps we should all take a breath. No, Julian snapped. I'm done enabling this. Alistair, if you continue down this path, I'll have no choice but to call an emergency board meeting. Your mental fitness to run this company. Try it, Alistair said coldly. Call the meeting. Question my fitness. But Julian, if I find out you had anything to do with what happened to Liana, no board in the world will protect you. Julian stared at him for a long moment, then turned on his heel and left, slamming the door behind him. Grace whistled low. That was intense. You really think he's involved? I don't know what to think anymore. Alistair sank back into his chair. But someone went to extraordinary lengths to fake Liana's death. Someone with resources, connections, and a motive. The question is why? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Alara. Mom agreed to meet. Noon at Central Park, Bethesda Fountain. Come alone. Alistair's heart raced. In 3 hours he would either confirm his desperate hope or shatter it completely. Either way he would have answers. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Alistair tried to focus on the documents Grace brought him, but his mind kept drifting to memories of Liana. Their first meeting at a charity auction, where she'd outbid him for a painting just to prove a point. Their wedding in a small chapel upstate, just family and close friends, the way she'd insisted despite his wealth. The day she'd told him about the pregnancy, both of them crying with joy in their kitchen. At 11:30, he left Sterling Tower despite Grace's protests about security. The October air was crisp autumn leaves swirling through the streets of Manhattan. Central Park was dressed in gold and crimson families, enjoying the mild weather, unaware of the drama about to unfold. He reached Bethesda Fountain at 11:50, his pulse thundering in his ears. The angel atop the fountain seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, her wings spread wide like a phoenix. "Mr. Sterling." He turned to find Alara approaching, her arm linked with a woman wearing a heavy coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. His breath caught. Even from a distance, even with her face partially hidden, he knew. The way she walked, slightly favoring her left leg from an old dance injury. The tilt of her head when she was nervous. The way her fingers drummed against her thigh, always to the rhythm of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her favorite piece. "Mom," Alara said gently, "this is Mr. Sterling, the man I told you about." The woman slowly removed her sunglasses, and Alistair's world stopped. 20 years had changed her added lines around her eyes, streaks of silver in her auburn hair. But those honey-colored eyes, that crescent-shaped scar on her chin, from a childhood fall, the way she bit her lower lip, when uncertain it was Liana. His Liana. "Hello," she said, her voice exactly as he remembered, though tinged with uncertainty. "Alara says you think you know me." He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 20 years of grief, of guilt, of endless what-ifs crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Mr. Sterling." Alara touched his arm in concern. "Liana," he whispered. "The woman Amelia." Liana frowned. "That name. Why does that name make my chest hurt?" She pressed a hand to her heart, wincing. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what's happening." Alistair took a step forward, then stopped, afraid she might disappear like a mirage. "The bracelet. May I see your bracelet?" She extended her wrist wordlessly. He reached out with trembling fingers, touching the phoenix charm he'd designed so many years ago. On the back, barely visible, was the engraving, "To my phoenix forever rising, A.S." "Oh God," Liana breathed, staring at the inscription. "A.S. Those initials. I dream about those initials." "You dream?" Alistair's voice cracked. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, though she didn't seem to know why. "A man calling my name. Not Amelia, something else. L something. And roses. White roses everywhere. And a song, always the same song playing." "Nocturne in E-flat major," Alistair said. "You walked down the aisle to it." Liana's knees buckled. Alara caught her, helping her to a nearby bench. "Mom, are you okay?" "The dreams," Liana gasped. "They're not dreams, are they? They're memories." Alistair knelt in front of her, not caring about his expensive suit on the dirty ground. "Liana, what happened to you? The accident? The fire? Everyone said you were dead." "I don't know." The anguish in her voice tore at him. "I woke up in a hospital with nothing. No memories, no identification, nothing but this bracelet and a baby growing inside me. They said I was found on a road unconscious with burns and smoke inhalation. No one reported me missing. No one came looking. I searched," Alistair said desperately. "For months I searched. But the police, the forensics, everyone said you died in that crash." "Someone didn't want us to find each other," Alara said quietly. Both adults turned to look at her. "Think about it. Mom was pregnant when she disappeared. If she'd died, who would have inherited your fortune, Mr. Sterling?" The blood drained from Alistair's face. "Julian. My cousin Julian would have inherited everything. And he was the one who identified the body." Grace's voice came from behind them. They all turned to see her approaching with a laptop bag. "I'm sorry for following you, Alistair, but I found something you need to see." She pulled out her laptop, balancing it on the bench. "The insurance payout for Liana's death Julian handled everything. But here's the interesting part: 3 days before the accident, he took out an additional policy on her life. $20 million with the company as beneficiary. He never told me about that, Alistair said, his voice deadly quiet. There's more. I found the dental records used to identify the body. They were provided by a Dr. Marcus Webb, who coincidentally left the country 2 weeks after the funeral and hasn't practiced medicine since. His bank records from that time show a deposit of $500,000 from an offshore account. An account connected to Julian? Ilara asked. I can't prove that yet, but I'm working on it. Grace looked at Liana with wonder. Mrs. Sterling, I can't believe you're alive. Liana flinched. I'm not Mrs. Sterling. I'm Amelia Vance. I don't remember being anyone else. But you are, Alistair said gently. You're Liana Sterling, my wife. Ilara is our daughter. Ilara made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. This is insane. This morning I was a waitress with a single mom. Now you're telling me I'm an heiress and my father is a billionaire. More importantly, sons, Grace said, you're both in danger. If Julian tried to kill Liana once, what happens when he finds out she's alive? As if summoned by his name, Alistair's phone rang. Julian. Answer it, Grace said. Act normal. We need time to build a case. Alistair took a breath and answered. Julian. Where are you? His cousin's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. The board is asking questions. They want to know why you're liquidating assets. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The $10 million transfer from the emergency fund. What are you planning, Alistair? Alistair hadn't touched the emergency fund. He met Grace's eyes and she shook her head. I'll be back in the office soon, he said carefully. We'll discuss it then. We'll discuss it now. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for 3 o'clock. Be there or I'll have no choice but to invoke the mental fitness clause. The line went dead. He's scared, Grace said. He's making moves because he knows you're getting close to the truth. We need somewhere safe, Alistair said, looking at Liana and Ilara. If Julian realizes... No, Liana interrupted, standing. I've been running and hiding for 20 years without even knowing it. I won't run anymore. She turned to Alistair, and for a moment he saw a flash of the fierce woman he'd fallen in love with. If this man tried to kill me, tried to steal our daughter's life, then we face him. Together. Mom, Ilara said worriedly. You don't remember. No, I don't remember being Liana Sterling. But I remember being Amelia Vance, and Amelia Vance didn't raise a coward. And looking at you, she turned to Alistair, at the pain in your eyes, the grief you've carried. I know you're not lying. I can feel it like a song I can't quite recall, but know every note. Alistair reached out tentatively, and she took his hand. The moment their skin touched, she gasped. Your hands, she whispered. I know your hands. They're in my dreams, holding mine, wearing a ring. She looked down at his finger, at the phoenix ring that matched her bracelet. We were happy, weren't we? So happy, he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. We were planning to name her Aurora if it was a girl. After the dawn, because you said she would be our new beginning. Ilara almost. Aurora covered her mouth with her hand. Mom always loved that name. She said it came to her in a dream. 3 o'clock, Grace said, checking her watch. We have 3 hours to prepare for that board meeting. 3 hours to figure out how to expose Julian without putting you all in danger. I have an idea, Ilara said suddenly. What if we don't expose him at the meeting? What if we let him think he's won? They all looked at her. Think about it. She continued, the strategic mind that had earned her a scholarship to NYU despite their poverty showing through. He's had 20 years to cover his tracks. But if he thinks Mom is dead, if he thinks Mr. Sterling is having a breakdown, he'll get overconfident. He'll make a mistake. "You want to use us as bait," Liana said, but she was smiling slightly. "That's dangerous." "Everything about this is dangerous," Alara pointed out. "But we have something he doesn't know about. Mom is alive. That's our advantage." Alistair looked at his family, because that's what they were despite the lost years, despite the manipulation and lies. His wife who didn't remember him, but trusted him anyway. His daughter brilliant and brave who'd grown up without him, but somehow inherited his strategic mind. "All right," he said, "here's what we're going to do." The Sterling Tower boardroom had never felt more like a battlefield. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces ranging from concerned to skeptical. Julian stood at the head, a picture of composed authority in his Italian suit. Alistair entered at exactly 3 o'clock alone. "Thank you for coming," Julian said, though his tone suggested anything but gratitude. "As you all know, we're here to discuss Alistair's recent, erratic behavior." Erratic. Alistair took his seat, the picture of calm. "I'd call it thorough." Margaret Walsh, the longest-serving board member, leaned forward. "Alistair, Julian has shared some concerning information. The incident at the restaurant, your hospitalization, these requests for decades-old files. I've been investigating some discrepancies in our historical records," Alistair said smoothly. "Due diligence, nothing more." "Due diligence." Julian's voice rose slightly. "You accused me of murdering your wife!" Gasps rippled around the table. "Did I?" Alistair tilted his head. "I simply asked if you were involved in her accident. Your defensive reaction was interesting." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Julian said, addressing the board. "He's paranoid, seeing conspiracies where none exist. For the good of the company." "For the good of the company," Alistair interrupted. "Perhaps we should discuss the $20 million insurance policy you took out on my wife 3 days before her death." Silence fell like a hammer. Julian's face went pale, then red. "That was standard corporate insurance, all key personnel." "She wasn't key personnel. She was an artist who occasionally attended charity functions." Alistair pulled out his phone, pretending to check something. In reality, he was watching the recording app Grace had activated, capturing every word. "The board approved that policy," Julian said, but several members were shaking their heads. "I don't recall that," Margaret said slowly. "In fact, I don't recall being informed about any additional insurance." "You're mistaken," Julian said quickly. Too quickly. "The records will show." "The records were falsified," Grace said, entering the room with a box of documents. "I've spent the last 3 hours going through everything. Forged signatures, backdated documents, a complex web of fraud spanning 20 years. "This is ridiculous," Julian sputtered. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "I can." Everyone turned as Alara walked in, followed by a woman in a dark coat and sunglasses. "Who the hell are you?" Julian demanded. "Ilara Vance," she said clearly. "Or should I say, Ilara Sterling." The woman beside her removed her sunglasses, and chaos erupted. "Liana," Margaret Walsh gasped, nearly falling out of her chair. "It can't be," another board member said. "She's dead. We went to the funeral." Julian had gone completely white, his hands gripping the table. "This is a trick. An actress. Alistair's lost his mind and hired—" "I have a birthmark," Liana said quietly, but her voice carried across the room. "Shaped like a crescent moon on my left shoulder blade. Margaret, you commented on it once at a company retreat in the Hamptons. You said it looked like a smile. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. My God, it is you. No, Julian said, backing away from the table. No, you're dead. You died in that car crash. You mean the crash you orchestrated? Alistair stood, his calm facade finally cracking. The brake lines cut, the route changed at the last minute to send her down that dangerous mountain road. You can't prove anything, Julian said, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Dr. Marcus Webb, Grace said, pulling out a document. We found him. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. You paid him to provide false dental records to identify a body that wasn't Liana's. Whose body was it? One of the board members asked, horrified. A Jane Doe from the morgue, Grace replied. Already burned beyond recognition from a different accident. Webb made the switch, and Julian identified her as Liana. But why? Margaret asked. Julian, you had everything. Position, wealth, respect. Why would you do this? Julian laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Everything, I had nothing. I was the poor cousin taken in out of charity. Watching Alistair get everything handed to him, the company, the fortune, the perfect wife. And then she got pregnant. An heir. My position would mean nothing once that child was born. So you tried to kill her, Alistair said, his voice deadly quiet. You tried to kill my pregnant wife. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Julian burst out, then seemed to realize what he'd admitted. I mean, keep talking, Detective Raymond Chen said, entering the room with several officers. Mr. Julian Sterling, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and about a dozen other charges I'll detail at the station. As the officers moved toward him, Julian made a desperate break for the window. For a horrifying moment, it seemed he might throw himself through it, but Alistair caught him, spinning him around and pinning him against the wall. 20 years, Alistair snarled. 20 years I mourned her. 20 years my daughter grew up without me. 20 years Liana lived with no memories, no identity, no family. Alistair, Liana's voice cut through his rage. Let him go. Let the police take him. He turned to look at her, this woman who was his wife but wasn't, who knew him but didn't. Slowly he released Julian, who slumped to the floor, all fight gone. As the police led Julian away, he looked back one last time. She was supposed to die, he said hollowly. I don't understand how she survived. I saved her, a small voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly woman with a walker, her face weathered, but her eyes sharp. Margaret Donnelly, she said. Former nurse at Mercy General. I was driving home from my shift that night when I saw the crash. The car was starting to burn, but she'd been thrown clear. Unconscious, badly hurt, but alive. I got her to my hospital. Why didn't you report it? Detective Chen asked. Margaret's chin lifted defiantly. I tried. I called the police, gave them the location. But the next day men came to the hospital, official-looking with badges saying they were investigating. They took all her belongings, except that bracelet. It was tangled in her hair, and I'd put it in my pocket to keep it safe. After they left, I had a bad feeling. Then I saw the news about Liana Sterling, dying in that exact spot, and I knew something was wrong. So you hid her, Alistair said wonderingly. I protected her, Margaret corrected. Gave her a new name from my favorite book, helped her start over. I always hoped someday she'd remember, but the trauma was too severe. Liana moved toward the elderly woman, taking her hands. You saved my life, my daughter's life. I did what was right, Margaret said simply. I'm just sorry it took so long for the truth to come out. The boardroom was silent for a long moment, everyone processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Finally, Margaret Walsh cleared her throat. I move to reinstate Alistair Sterling as CEO without question or condition, and to formally recognize Lyanna Sterling and Alara Sterling as rightful family members with all associated rights and privileges. Seconded came from multiple board members simultaneously. All in favor? Margaret Walsh asked. Every hand rose. Motion carried. She turned to Lyanna and Alara. Welcome home. But Lyanna was shaking her head, backing toward the door. This is too much. I'm not this person you all remember. I'm Amelia Vance, a woman who makes jewelry and reads stories to children at the library. I don't know how to be Lyanna Sterling. She fled the room before anyone could stop her. Alara started to follow, but Alistair caught her arm gently. Let me, he said. He found her on the roof garden, 52 floors above Manhattan, standing at the railing and staring out at the city. The setting sun painted everything gold, and for a moment he was transported back 20 years to another rooftop, another sunset, when he'd proposed to her on this very spot. I proposed to you here, he said quietly, not approaching, giving her space. You said yes before I even finished asking. She didn't turn around. I don't remember. I know. How can you stand it? She asked, her voice breaking. Looking at me and seeing her the woman you loved, but I'm not her. I'm just wearing her face. You're wrong, Alistair said, taking a single step closer. You're not wearing her face. You are her just evolved. 20 years of different experiences, different struggles, but the core of you, the woman who stands up to injustice, who protects her daughter fiercely, who faces danger rather than running from it. That's all, Lyanna. She finally turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. What if I never remember? What if those 20 years are just gone? Then we make new memories, he said simply. If you'll let me. She studied his face for a long moment. Alara likes you. She's trying to play it cool, but I can tell. She's always wondered about her father, created elaborate stories about who he might be. What kind of stories? A small smile tugged at Lyanna's lips. A secret agent. A superhero. Once she decided you were a pirate king who'd been lost at sea. I'm afraid the reality is much more boring. Just a businessman who never stopped loving his wife. That's not boring, she said softly. That's actually the most romantic thing I've ever heard, or at least that I remember hearing. They stood there as the sun set, the city lights beginning to twinkle below them. Finally, Lyanna spoke again. I want to try, she said. Not to be who I was, but to discover who we could be. You, me, and Alara. If you're willing to be patient. I've waited 20 years, Alistair said. I can wait as long as you need. She held out her hand, and he took it, their phoenix rings catching the last rays of sunlight. Tell me about her, Lyanna said. Tell me about the woman I used to be. So he did. As the stars came out over Manhattan, he told her about their first meeting, their wedding, their dreams for the future. He told her about her art, her laugh, her terrible cooking, but amazing baking skills. He told her about the baby they'd been so excited to meet, the nursery they'd painted together, the arguments over names. Aurora, Lyanna murmured. We were going to name her Aurora. You remember? No, she said sadly. But when Alara was born, that name came to me so strongly. The nurses thought I was confused, kept calling her Alara, which was the name I'd chosen. But for weeks I would look at her and think, Aurora. Maybe part of you did remember, Alistair suggested. Maybe love is stronger than memory. Before she could respond, Alara appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Grace says the media's gotten wind of the story. The building's surrounded by reporters. We should get you both somewhere safe, Alistair said immediately. I have a house in the Hamptons. No, Liana said firmly. No more hiding. If we're doing this, we're doing it publicly. Julian took 20 years from us by keeping this secret. I won't give him a single day more. Mom, Alara said uncertainly, are you sure this is going to change everything? Liana looked at her daughter, their daughter, and smiled. Everything already changed the moment you said, Sir, my mom has the same ring. Now we're just choosing how to face it. The next morning, the New York Times headline read, Phoenix Rise's billionaire's wife found alive after 20 years. The story dominated every news cycle, trending globally within hours. Hashtag Phoenix Rising became the top hashtag on social media, with millions sharing their own stories of lost love and impossible reunions. But in a modest apartment in Queens, away from the media frenzy, a different scene was unfolding. Liana stood in the doorway of the apartment she'd called home for 2 decades, Alistair and Alara beside her. The space was small but warm, filled with handmade furniture, walls covered in Alara's childhood artwork, and shelves lined with journals. My entire life, she said softly, or at least the life I remember. She walked to a shelf and pulled down a journal, one of dozens. I started writing the day I left the hospital. The doctors said it might help my memory return. She opened it, revealing pages of neat handwriting. June 1st, 2005. They tell me my name is Amelia Vance. I don't know if that's true, but it's all I have. Today I had a daughter. She's perfect. When I look at her, I feel like my heart might explode with love. I've named her Alara, but sometimes in my dreams, I call her something else. Something that starts with A. Why can't I remember? Alistair's throat tightened. You wrote every day, almost. 20 years of journals. 20 years of searching for who I was. She pulled out another journal, this one from a year ago. I still dream about the man with gray eyes. He's holding my hand and there's music playing. Always the same song. I asked the librarian to help me find it, and she identified it as Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. When I heard it, I cried for hours and didn't know why. That was our song, Alistair said hoarsely. You walked down the aisle to it. Alara was reading over her mother's shoulder. You dreamed about him all this time. Not him exactly. Fragments, images, feelings. Liana looked at Alistair. Your eyes mostly, and your hands, and a sense of being safe, completely safe, which I never felt in waking life. These journals, Grace said from where she'd been quietly documenting everything, they're evidence of the profound trauma you suffered. They could be crucial in the case against Julian. They're more than that, Alara said, tears in her eyes. They're proof that love survives even when memory doesn't. Mom, you never forgot him, not really. Your heart remembered even when your mind couldn't. A knock at the door interrupted them. Alistair opened it to find Detective Chen. Sorry to intrude, he said, but there's been a development. Julian's lawyer is pushing for a plea deal. He's willing to confess everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. How reduced? Alistair demanded. 20 years instead of life. 20 years, Liana said quietly. The same amount of time he stole from us. It's not enough, Alistair said angrily. No, Liana agreed, but it's something, and more importantly, a full confession means the truth comes out. All of it. No trials, no questioning my identity or Alara's parentage. Clean slate. Detective Chen nodded. The DA wants your input before deciding. Liana looked at Alistair, then at Alara. What do you think? I think, Alara said slowly, that we've lost enough time to him already. If fighting this means years of trials appeals constant media attention, maybe it's better to just move forward. Agreed, Liana said. She turned to Detective Chen. We'll accept the plea deal on one condition. He has to allocate all of his assets to a fund for amnesia and trauma victims. Every penny he has goes to helping people like Mifu. I'll convey that to the DA, Chen said. I think they'll agree. After he left, they stood in the small apartment surrounded by the life Liana had built as Amelia Vance. So what now? Ilara asked. Now. Alistair said, we do what your mother suggested. We move forward. Together, if you'll both have me. It won't be easy, Liana warned. I may never fully remember our past. Then we'll build a future, Alistair said. The three of us. Ilara looked between her parents, one she'd just found, one she'd just learned was alive, and made a decision. I want to change my name, she announced. Not legally, not yet. But could you call me Aurora just to try it? Liana gasped, her hand flying to her heart. Aurora. Yes. Yes, that feels right. Aurora Sterling, Alistair said, testing the name. Our new beginning. And in that small Queen's apartment surrounded by journals documenting 20 years of loss and searching a family began to heal. It would take time. There would be setbacks, moments when the weight of the lost years threatened to crush them. But they had found each other against impossible odds. A chance encounter, a waitress's innocent observation about a ring, had unraveled 2 decades of lies and reunited a love that even amnesia couldn't destroy. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and this time nothing would bring it down. The weeks following the revelation passed in a blur of legal proceedings, medical examinations, and cautious family dinners. Aurora, she'd fully embraced the name, now moved between her mother's modest Queen's apartment and her father's Manhattan penthouse like a bridge between 2 worlds that were slowly merging into one. On this particular November evening, she found her mother standing in Alistair's living room, staring at a wall of photographs. 20 years of Alistair's life documented in frames, company milestones, charity galas, holiday parties, all featuring him alone or with carefully maintained distance from others. He never remarried, Liana said softly, tracing a finger along a photo from 5 years ago. Alistair stood at a podium accepting an award, his eyes hollow despite his smile. Never even dated, according to Grace. Mom, you're trembling, Aurora noticed, moving to her side. I feel so guilty, Liana admitted. He spent 20 years mourning me while I was living. Maybe not remembering, but living. I had you. I had Margaret, who became like a mother to me. I had friends at the library, my jewelry customers, a life. And he had nothing but grief and these photos. That wasn't your fault. Alistair's voice came from the doorway. He'd been giving them space to explore the penthouse, understanding that too much too fast could overwhelm Liana. None of it was your fault. But I should remember. Liana turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. You deserve a wife who remembers your wedding day, who remembers falling in love with you, who remembers conceiving our child. Instead, you have this broken woman who looks like her, but stop. Alistair crossed the room in 3 strides, gently taking her hands. You are not broken. You survived something horrible, raised our daughter alone, built a life from nothing. That takes incredible strength. The doctors say my memories might never come back, she whispered. The trauma was too severe, the amnesia too complete. What if I'm never the Liana you remember? Then I'll fall in love with Amelia, he said simply. I'm already halfway there. Aurora watched her parents, strange to think of them that way. and saw something shift in her mother's expression. Liana pulled her hands free, but only to reach up and touch Alistair's face, her fingers tracing the lines that grief had etched there. "Your eyes," she murmured. "I drew them once, about 10 years ago. I was sketching at the park, not thinking about anything in particular. And when I looked down, I'd drawn these eyes. Gray, like storm clouds, but warm underneath. I kept that sketch. It's in my apartment, hidden in a journal from 2014. You drew me. I drew the eyes from my dreams. I didn't know they were yours." She let her hand drop. "Show me more. Show me who we were." Alistair led them to his study, a room Aurora hadn't seen yet. Unlike the modern minimalism of the rest of the penthouse, this space was warm, cluttered, lived in, and every surface was covered with Liana's artwork. "My paintings," Liana gasped. "You kept them all?" "Every one I could find," Alistair confirmed. "Galleries, private collectors, estate sales. I spent 2 decades tracking down every piece you ever sold or gave away." Liana moved through the room like a sleepwalker, stopping at a large canvas dominating one wall. It depicted a phoenix rising from a garden of white roses, its wings spreading toward a full moon. "I painted this for our 4th anniversary. You said the phoenix was me rising from the ashes of my parents' death to build something beautiful. But I always thought it was you, the girl who survived foster care, to become an extraordinary artist." "I still paint," Liana said quietly. "Different style now, more abstract, but the colors are the same." She turned to Aurora. "Remember that series I did last year? The ones you said looked like dancing flames?" "The ones that sold out at the library fundraiser in an hour," Aurora confirmed. "You called them fragments of before." Alistair pulled out his phone, scrolling to photos Grace had sent him. "These..." Liana looked at the images of her recent work, then at the paintings on his walls, recognition dawning. "They're responses. My subconscious responding to my own work 20 years apart. The same themes, the same movement, just evolved." "Dr. Reeves said this might happen," Aurora reminded them. Dr. Sarah Reeves was the neurologist they'd been working with, an expert in trauma-induced amnesia. She said memory isn't just conscious recall. It's in our muscles, our preferences, our instincts. "Speaking of Dr. Reeves," Alistair said carefully, "she called earlier. The results from the latest brain scans are in. She'd like to see us tomorrow." Liana's hand found Aurora's automatically, a gesture of maternal protection that had nothing to do with memory and everything to do with instinct. All of us, oh," Alistair confirmed. She said it wasn't bad news, just interesting. The next morning found them in Dr. Reeves's office at Mount Sinai's neurology department. The walls were covered with brain scans, comparison images that meant nothing to Aurora, but had her parents leaning forward intently. "What we're seeing, Dr." Reeves explained, pointing to areas highlighted in different colors, "is remarkable. Mrs. Sterling, Liana, please, or Amelia. I answer to both now. Liana, then. Your brain has essentially rewired itself around the damaged areas. The traumatic amnesia destroyed certain pathways, but your brain built new ones. It's like, imagine a highway that's been destroyed. Instead of rebuilding the exact same road, your brain built side streets, alternate routes." "Which is why she can't remember," Alistair said heavily. "But it's also why she survived," Dr. Reeves countered. "Most people with this level of trauma would have experienced complete personality dissolution. Instead, Liana's brain preserved the core of who she was, her artistic ability, her maternal instincts, her moral framework, and built a new consciousness around it." "So I'm like 2 people in one body?" Liana asked. "More like one person with 2 sets of experiences." The interesting part is here, Dr. Reeves pointed to another scan. See this activity? It spikes when you're around familiar stimuli. Your husband's voice, your daughter's presence, even certain smells we tested. Your emotional memory is intact, even if your episodic memory isn't. Which means, Aurora asked, which means your mother's feelings for your father, for you, for her life before they're all still there. She just can't consciously access the experiences that created them. That's why I trust you, Liana said, suddenly looking at Alistair. Everyone thought I was crazy letting a stranger into my life so quickly. But you don't feel like a stranger. You feel like home. There's more, Dr. Reeves continued. We've been analyzing the journals you provided, tracking linguistic patterns, recurring themes. There's a consistency that suggests not just emotional memory, but something deeper. Liana, you've been trying to tell your own story for 20 years without knowing it. She pulled out several journal excerpts, highlighted passages visible. Look at this entry from 2007. I dreamed of drowning in fire, but someone pulled me up. His hands were strong, safe. I woke up crying not from fear, but from loss. And this from 2012. Aurora asked about her father today. I told her I didn't know, but that's not quite true. I know he loved her. I can feel it like an echo in my bones. Aurora was crying now, seeing years of her mother's pain laid out in clinical detail. You suffered so much, and I never knew. You were my anchor, Liana said fiercely, pulling her daughter close. Every time the emptiness threatened to swallow me, I looked at you and knew I had a purpose. You saved me as much as Margaret did. About that, Dr. Reeves said. I've been in contact with Margaret Donnelly. She provided medical records from your initial treatment. The amount of smoke inhalation suggests you were in that burning car for several minutes. The fact that you survived, that your baby survived, is miraculous. Julian will pay for this, Alistair said darkly. He's already paying. Grace's voice came from the doorway. She entered with a tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Julian's full confession just went public. She handed the tablet to Alistair, who read aloud, I, Julian Sterling, confess to the attempted murder of Liana Sterling in October 2004. I cut her brake lines and rerouted her GPS to send her down Berkshire Pass, knowing the road was dangerous. I paid Dr. Marcus Webb to falsify dental records and identify another body as hers. I did this out of greed and jealousy, wanting to secure my position as Alistair's heir. I have lived with this guilt for 20 years, and I accept full responsibility for my actions. There's more, Grace said. He's also confessed to embezzling nearly $30 million over the past 2 decades, using his position to funnel money through shell companies. The FBI is now involved. $30 million, Alistair said coldly. Blood money. All of which will go to the victim fund, Liana requested, Grace confirmed. Plus his personal assets. The total fund will be close to $50 million. It won't undo what he did, Liana said quietly, but maybe it can prevent others from suffering. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat. There's one more thing I wanted to discuss. Experimental treatment. There's a new therapy combining targeted electromagnetic stimulation with guided memory reconstruction. It doesn't restore memories, but it can sometimes help integrate the 2 aspects of consciousness, the before and after. Is it dangerous? Aurora asked immediately. Not dangerous, but intensive, and emotionally difficult. You'd essentially be reconciling 2 versions of yourself, accepting both as equally valid. I want to try, Liana said without hesitation. Not to become who I was, but to become whole. The treatment began the following week. Every morning, Liana would sit in a specially designed chair while electromagnets stimulated specific regions of her brain. Simultaneously, Alistair would talk to her, sharing memories, showing photos, playing music from their past. Aurora watched from the observation room, seeing her mother's face cycle through emotions, joy, sorrow, frustration, peace. Sometimes Liana would laugh at stories Alistair told. Sometimes she would cry. Once she suddenly said, "The beach house in Montauk. We made love there during a thunderstorm," then looked shocked at her own words. "It's working," Dr. Reeves said, watching the brain activity monitors. "She's not recovering memories, but she's integrating emotional echoes with current experience." On the fourth day of treatment, something shifted. Liana was looking at a photo from their wedding when her whole body went rigid. "The song," she whispered. "Play the song." Alistair quickly pulled up Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major on his phone. As the familiar notes filled the room, Liana began to move her hands as if playing piano. "You played this for me," she said, eyes closed. "Not at the wedding. Before. In a practice room at Juilliard. You were so nervous your hands were shaking. You said, I'm better with numbers than notes, but you make me want to be artistic." Alistair's breath caught. "You remember?" "Not remember. No. I know it happened. I can feel the truth of it." She opened her eyes, looking at him with wonder. "It's like reading a book about yourself and recognizing it as autobiography, even if you can't recall writing it." "Mom." Aurora had entered the treatment room, unable to stay away. "Are you okay?" Liana held out her arms and Aurora rushed into them. "I'm more than okay. I'm becoming." "Becoming what?" "Myself. All of myself." The treatment continued for 2 more weeks, each session bringing new integration. Not memories, but understanding. Acceptance. Liana began to move differently, her gestures unconsciously echoing those in old videos. She started cooking recipes she claimed she'd never made before, but her hands knew exactly what to do. One evening she sat at Alistair's piano. He'd bought it hoping she might remember playing, and her fingers found melodies she didn't know she knew. "That's the lullaby you composed," Alistair said softly. "You were going to sing it to our baby." "Aurora's lullaby," Liana murmured, continuing to play. "I've been humming this for 20 years without knowing what it was." Aurora recorded it on her phone, tears streaming down her face. "You hummed this to me every night when I was little. I thought you made it up as you went." "Parts of us survive even when memory doesn't," Liana said, looking at her family. And they were a family now, despite everything. Love finds a way. But the integration wasn't without its challenges. There were days when Liana felt split in two, the confident artist's wife warring with the cautious single mother. Days when looking at Alistair brought pain instead of comfort, the weight of 20 lost years crushing. "I feel like I'm betraying her," Liana confessed to Aurora one night. They were in her Queen's apartment, packing boxes for the eventual move. "The woman I was. By not remembering her, by moving forward without her memories, I'm letting her die all over again." "Or you're letting her live," Aurora suggested. "Through you. Through the choices you're making now." "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher. A woman who raised me alone, who taught me strength and resilience, who showed me that identity isn't about where you come from, but who you choose to be." Liana pulled her daughter close. "I love you. Both versions of me love you." "I know," Aurora said. "That's how I know you're still you." The media attention was relentless. Every major news outlet wanted an exclusive with the Phoenix family, as they'd been dubbed. Alistair hired a PR firm to manage the requests, but some attention was unavoidable. It came to a head when Vanity Fair offered a feature story not just about the reunion, but about Liana's art, both before and after. The journalist Rebecca Chen was known for her sensitive handling of trauma stories. "I don't know," Liana said, looking at the formal request. They were in Alistair's office, the three of them reviewing it together. "Opening our lives like that. It could help other families," Aurora pointed out. "Other people dealing with amnesia, with loss, with impossible situations. And it would let us control the narrative," Alistair added. "Better one comprehensive story than 1,000 speculative pieces." Liana looked between them, her two champions, and made a decision. "All right. But we do it together. All three of us." The interview took place over several days. Rebecca was thorough but kind, asking difficult questions with genuine empathy. She wanted to see Liana's art, both periods. She wanted to understand how Aurora had grown up, what she'd believed about her father. She wanted to know how Alistair had survived 20 years of grief. "I didn't survive," Alistair told her honestly. "I functioned. There's a difference. It wasn't until I saw Elara Aurora that night at the restaurant that I realized I'd been a ghost haunting my own life." "And now?" Rebecca asked. "Now I'm learning to live again. We all are." The photographer wanted a family portrait for the magazine cover. They stood together in Alistair's penthouse, the city sprawling behind them. Liana wore the phoenix bracelet. Alistair wore his matching ring. Aurora stood between them, a bridge between past and future. "One more," the photographer called. "This time don't pose, just be." Liana turned to look at Alistair, and he reached up to touch her face. Aurora laughed at something one of the assistants said. The camera clicked. That photo would become iconic, not because it was perfectly composed, but because it captured something real. Three people choosing to be a family despite impossible odds. The article ran with the headline, "The Phoenix and the Flames, a Family Reborn." It told their story honestly, the pain, the loss, the cautious hope. It didn't pretend everything was perfect. It acknowledged that Liana might never recover her memories, that 20 years couldn't be reclaimed, that healing would take time. But it also celebrated resilience, the power of love to endure, even when memory couldn't. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of letters poured in from families dealing with similar trauma. Support groups formed. The Liana Sterling Foundation, funded by Julian's seized assets, began operating, providing resources for amnesia patients and their families. One letter particularly moved them. It was from a woman in Oregon whose husband had been missing for 5 years, presumed dead. After reading their story, she'd hired a private investigator. Her husband was found in a care facility in California alive, but with no memory of his past life. "You gave me hope," she wrote. "You showed me that love doesn't need memory to survive." "We're helping people," Liana said wonderingly. "Our pain is helping others heal." "That's what you always wanted," Alistair said, then caught himself. "Sorry, I shouldn't." "No, it's okay," Liana interrupted. "Tell me what I wanted. Help me know myself." "You wanted to matter," he said softly. "Not fame or fortune, just to make a difference. You used to say art was your way of leaving fingerprints on the world." "Some things don't change," Aurora observed. "Mom still volunteers at the library, still teaches art to underprivileged kids, still wants to help." "Maybe that's what Dr. Reeves meant," Liana said. "About core self. The details change, but the essence remains." As winter deepened, they settled into a new rhythm. Liana kept her apartment in Queens, but spent most nights at the penthouse. Aurora officially changed her last name to Sterling and started working at the company, learning the business from Grace. There were still difficult moments. Liana would sometimes flinch when Alistair moved too quickly, phantom trauma from an accident she couldn't remember. Alistair would occasionally call her name in his sleep, 20 years of nightmares, not easily erased. Aurora struggled with anger at the years stolen from their home at growing up without a father. But there were beautiful moments too. The first time Liana said, "I love you" to Alistair, not remembering their past love, but choosing a new one. The day Aurora called Alistair Dad, casually without thinking, then froze as they all realized what had happened. The morning Liana woke up and said, "I dreamed about our wedding. I don't remember it, but I dreamed it exactly as you described." Dr. Reeves called it emotional archaeology, excavating feelings that had been buried but not destroyed. One evening in December, as snow began to fall over Manhattan, they decorated a Christmas tree in the penthouse. It was their first holiday season together, and they were creating new traditions. "We need an angel for the top," Aurora said, standing on a ladder. "Not an angel," Liana said suddenly. "A phoenix." Alistair disappeared into his study, returning with a small box. "I had this made 20 years ago," he said, opening it to reveal a crystal phoenix tree topper. "For our first Christmas with the baby. I never used it." Liana took it with trembling hands. "It's beautiful." "You're beautiful," he said softly. "Both versions of you." She kissed him, then not the cautious kisses they'd shared since reuniting, but something deeper. When they pulled apart, Aurora was grinning. "Finally," she said. "I was starting to think you two would never figure it out." "Figure what out?" Liana asked. "That you're not trying to recover the past. You're building a future." As Aurora placed the phoenix atop the tree, it caught the light from the city below, casting rainbow reflections across the room. 3 people who'd been shattered and rebuilt standing together as snow fell silently outside. The phoenix had risen, but more importantly, it had learned to soar. The January cold bit through Liana's coat as she stood outside the federal courthouse watching guards escort Julian inside for his sentencing. 20 years he would serve the same 20 years he'd stolen from them. She'd insisted on attending despite Alistair's protests, needing to see this chapter close with her own eyes. "You don't have to do this," Alistair said beside her, his hand warm on her back. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice steady. "Both versions of me need to see him face justice." The courtroom was packed with media victims' rights advocates and curious onlookers. Aurora sat in the front row between her parents, her presence a living testament to what Julian had tried to destroy. As they waited for proceedings to begin, Liana noticed a familiar figure across the aisle, Margaret Donnelly, the nurse who'd saved her life. Margaret caught her eye and nodded, a silent exchange of understanding between 2 women bound by an extraordinary night 20 years ago. She'd been subpoenaed to testify about finding Liana, about the men who'd come asking questions about her decision to hide the truth. Judge Harrison entered, and the room fell silent. Julian was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his once perfect appearance now haggard, his shoulders slumped. When his eyes met Alistair's across the courtroom, something flickered there, regret, perhaps, or maybe just defeat. "Mr. Sterling," the judge addressed Julian, "you've pled guilty to attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and embezzlement. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say?" Julian stood slowly, his chains rattling. For a moment he said nothing. Then he turned to face Liana directly. "I've spent 20 years telling myself you were collateral damage," he said, his voice hollow. "That it wasn't personal, just business. But watching you these past months, seeing who you've become without your memories, raising Aurora alone, I realize I tried to destroy something extraordinary out of petty jealousy." He paused, swallowing hard. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back those years or your memories. But I want you to know that every night, for 20 years, I've seen your face in that burning car. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. You were supposed to die quickly, painlessly. The fire. His voice broke. The fire was my mistake. My failure even as a murderer. That's enough, Alistair said sharply, but Liana raised her hand. No, let him finish, she said. I need to hear this. Julian continued, his words coming faster now. I told myself Alistair would recover, find someone new, be happy. Instead, I watched him die inside day by day. I destroyed both of you, and for what money I couldn't enjoy, power that meant nothing, a life built on lies. He looked at Aurora then. You should have grown up with everything, 2 parents who loved you, wealth, security, opportunity. Instead, you grew up in struggle because of my greed. I'm sorry. It's inadequate, but it's all I have. Aurora stood, surprising everyone. I don't forgive you, she said clearly. I'll never forgive you. But I want you to know that despite what you did, I had a good life. My mother made sure of that. She raised me with love, integrity, and strength. You tried to destroy us, but you failed. We're here, we're together, and we're stronger than ever. You'll spend 20 years in prison, but we'll spend those years living, loving, building. That's our justice. She sat back down, and Liana took her hand, squeezing it proudly. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Julian Sterling, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, all your assets will be liquidated and transferred to the Liana Sterling Foundation for Trauma and Memory Recovery. You took 20 years from this family. Now 20 years will be taken from you. Court dismissed. As the guards led Julian away, he looked back one last time, not at Alistair, but at Liana. Your paintings, he said quietly. I kept one. The sunrise over the Hudson. It's in storage unit 47B on Lexington. I couldn't bear to sell it. It was too beautiful. Then he was gone, the door closing with finality behind him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Alistair's security team had created a path to their waiting car. As they drove away, Liana was quiet, processing what had just happened. Storage unit 47B, she murmured. He kept one of my paintings. Don't, Alistair warned. Don't feel sympathy for him. Not sympathy, Liana corrected. Just sadness. For the man he could have been if jealousy hadn't poisoned him. For the family we all could have been. We are a family, Aurora said firmly. Just not the one we might have been. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the family we're becoming is exactly who we're supposed to be. That evening, they went to the storage unit. Alistair had wanted to send someone else, but Liana insisted on going herself. The unit was filled with Julian's personal effects, things moved from his apartment after his arrest. And there, wrapped carefully in climate-controlled packaging, was the painting. Liana gasped when she saw it. The sunrise over the Hudson was rendered in brilliant oranges and golds, the river reflecting light like liquid fire. But what struck her most was the small figure she'd painted on the shore, a woman with her arms raised to the sky, celebrating the new day. I painted this, she whispered. 3 months after our wedding, Alistair confirmed. You said it represented new beginnings, the promise that every sunrise brings. You wanted Julian to have it for his birthday, because you said he seemed sad that maybe beauty would help. I gave it to him as a gift, and he used it to destroy me, Liana said, but there was no bitterness in her voice, only wonder. Yet he couldn't destroy the painting itself. Some beauty is too powerful to demolish, even for those who trade in destruction. What do you want to do with it? Aurora asked. Liana studied the painting for a long moment. Donate it to the foundation. Let it be the first piece in an art therapy program. If a painting can survive 20 years in the possession of someone who tried to kill its creator, maybe it can help others survive their trauma too. The next few weeks brought a different kind of challenge. With Julian's sentencing complete and media attention finally dying down, they had to face the question of what came next. The extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together were resolved, leaving them to navigate the ordinary complexity of being a family. It started with small tensions. Liana, used to independence, bristled at Alistair's protective instincts. Alistair, accustomed to control, struggled with Liana's need for autonomy. Aurora, caught between them, tried to play peacemaker while dealing with her own adjustment to sudden wealth and privilege. The breaking point came over something seemingly trivial, a charity gala. "I don't want to go," Liana said flatly, looking at the invitation. "I'm not ready for that world." "It's important," Alistair insisted. "The hospital wing we're dedicating is named after you. Your absence would be noticed." "Named after a woman I don't remember being," Liana shot back. "Do you understand how that feels, to be constantly compared to a ghost?" "You're not a ghost," Alistair said, frustration creeping into his voice. "You're my wife." "Am I? We were married 21 years ago. I don't remember it. Legally, I was declared dead. What are we really, Alistair?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Aurora, who'd been quietly studying in the corner, looked up with concern. "Maybe," she said carefully, "you need to stop trying to be who you were and figure out who you want to be now." Both parents turned to her. "I mean it," Aurora continued. "Mom, you're trying to be Liana Sterling, the society wife and artist. Dad, you're trying to recreate what you had before. But that's impossible. Those people, that relationship, it's gone. The question is, do Amelia Vance and Alistair Sterling want to be together now, as the people you are today?" The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Liana stood. "I need some air," she said, grabbing her coat. "Mom," Aurora started. "Let her go," Alistair said quietly. "She's right to question this. We've been so focused on what we lost, we haven't thought about what we're choosing." Liana walked for hours through Central Park, her mind churning. She found herself at Bethesda Fountain, where they'd reunited months ago. The angel atop the fountain seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. "You again," a voice said. She turned to find Margaret Donnelly, the elderly nurse, sitting on a nearby bench. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "I come here sometimes," Margaret said, patting the bench beside her. "To think, to remember. This is where I made the decision to hide you 20 years ago." Liana sat beside her. "Here, I'd brought you to the city for better medical care. You were healing physically but mentally. You were lost. I sat right here holding baby Aurora while you were in another procedure, and I had to decide report you as a potential missing person and risk whoever tried to kill you, finding you or hide you, and give you a chance at a new life. You chose to hide me. I chose to protect you. But Liana Amelia, whoever you are, now that choice ended when that young man collapsed in the restaurant. Now you have different choices to make. How do I choose between two lives, two selves?" Margaret took her hand. "You don't. You create a third option. You become someone new who honors both pasts. Is that even possible? You're doing it right now, aren't you? You're Amelia's strength and Liana's heart. You're a mother who raised a child alone and a wife discovering love again. You're an artist who paints in two styles that are slowly merging into something entirely new." Liana thought about her recent paintings, how they'd begun incorporating elements from both periods of her life, The bold colors of her past, the abstract emotions of her present, creating something unique. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I choose wrong?" "Then you choose again," Margaret said simply. "That's what life is, a series of choices, each one building on the last. You're not locked into being one person forever. You're allowed to evolve." When Liana returned to the penthouse, she found Alistair and Aurora in the kitchen cooking dinner together, or attempting to. Smoke was rising from a pan. Aurora was laughing, and Alistair was frantically consulting a cookbook. "The recipe said high heat," he protested. "For searing, not incinerating." Aurora giggled. "Mom, save us!" Liana surveyed the chaos, her billionaire husband and brilliant daughter defeated by chicken marsala, and felt something shift in her chest. Not memory, but recognition. This was her family. Not the family from before, not the family that might have been, but the family that was. "First, turn off the heat," she said, moving into the kitchen. "Second, open a window. Third, order takeout because this chicken is beyond saving." As she worked beside them, cleaning up the disaster, she made a decision. "I'll go to the gala," she announced. "Not as Liana Sterling, the woman I was, but as myself, whoever that is now. But I have conditions." "Name them," Alistair said immediately. "I choose my own dress. I speak for myself, not from talking points. And if anyone asks about my memories, I tell the truth, that I don't have them, and that's okay." "Done," Alistair agreed. "And one more thing," Liana added. "We go as a family, all three of us. Aurora's not hidden in the background anymore. She's a Sterling, she stands with us." Aurora's eyes widened. "Mom, I don't know that world." "Neither do I really," Liana said. "We'll learn together." The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the hospital's new neurological wing being its biggest charitable donation of the year. Liana wore a dress she'd chosen herself, not the haute couture Alistair had offered, but a simple, elegant design in deep purple that felt like her. As they entered the museum, hundreds of eyes turned their way. The Phoenix family, as the media had dubbed them, making their first official public appearance together. "Breathe." Alistair murmured, his hand steady on Liana's back. "I'm breathing," she replied, then smiled. "Actually, I'm okay. They're just people." The evening was a careful dance of introductions and conversations. Some guests clearly expected Liana to remember them, leading to awkward moments when she had to explain her amnesia. Others were meeting her for the first time, curious about the woman who'd captured Alistair Sterling's heart so completely he'd never moved on. "You're different than I expected," one society matron said, not unkindly. "The old Liana was quieter, more reserved." 20 years of raising a daughter alone changes a person," Liana replied. "I'm told the old Liana was lovely. I hope the current version is too, just in a different way." The woman studied her for a moment, then smiled genuinely. "I think I like this version better. She seems stronger." The highlight of the evening came during the dedication ceremony. Alistair was supposed to speak alone, but as he approached the podium, he held out his hand to Liana and Aurora. "This wing is named after my wife, Liana Sterling," he began. "But it's dedicated to all families affected by traumatic brain injury and memory loss. 20 years ago, I thought I lost everything. 6 months ago, I learned that love doesn't require memory to survive. My wife doesn't remember our past, but she's choosing our future. My daughter grew up without me, but she's giving me the chance to be her father now. This wing represents second chances, new beginnings, and the belief that families can be rebuilt even from ashes." He turned to Liana. "Would you like to say something?" She hadn't prepared remarks, but she stepped to the microphone anyway. "I'm told I was an artist before," she began. I'm still an artist now, just different. Art, like identity, evolves. It responds to trauma, to joy, to time. This wing will help people whose identities have been shattered by injury or illness. It won't give them back who they were, but it will help them discover who they can become. That's not tragedy, that's transformation. The applause was thunderous. As they stepped back, Aurora whispered, "You're amazing, both of you." But the evening's real surprise came later. A man approached them, elderly but sharp-eyed, introducing himself as Thomas Chen, a prominent art dealer. "Mrs. Sterling, I've been following your story," he said. "More importantly, I've been studying your art both periods. I'd like to propose an exhibition, not a retrospective of your old work or a showcase of your new work, but a dialogue between them, past and present in conversation." Liana's breath caught. I don't know if I'm ready for that." "Think about it," Thomas said, handing her his card. "Your story told through art could help thousands of people understand that identity isn't fixed, that we're all constantly becoming." As they drove home that night, Aurora asleep in the back seat, despite her insistence she was too old to doze off in cars, Liana studied Thomas Chen's business card. "You should do it," Alistair said quietly. "The exhibition. It would mean confronting both versions of myself publicly, comparing them, maybe finding one lacking. Or maybe finding them both beautiful in different ways," he suggested. "Liana, you've been so afraid of not being who you were that you haven't celebrated who you are." She looked at him in the dim light of the car. "Who am I? You're the woman who survived the impossible, who raised our daughter to be brilliant and kind, who makes me want to be better, to be worthy of this second chance. You're not my old wife returned. You're my new love built on the foundation of the old, but reaching towards something unprecedented. When did you realize that I'm not her, not really? The day you stood up to Julian in court. The old Liana would have been too gentle, too forgiving. You were fierce, protective. It was magnificent and completely different from before. That's when I stopped trying to recover what we had and started falling in love with who you are." Liana reached over and took his hand. "I love you too. Not because I remember loving you before, but because I choose to love you now." They were quiet the rest of the drive, but their joined hands spoke volumes. The exhibition preparation consumed the next 2 months. Liana threw herself into it with an intensity that surprised everyone. She worked 18-hour days creating new pieces that bridged her two styles paintings, that told the story of fracture and healing. Aurora often found her in the studio Alistair had set up, paint in her hair, staring at canvases with fierce concentration. "Mom, you need to eat," Aurora would say, bringing sandwiches. "I'm almost there," Liana would reply. "I can almost see it, who I'm becoming." The centerpiece of the exhibition was a massive triptych. The first panel showed a phoenix burning, painted in the realistic style of her early work. The second showed ashes, abstract and chaotic, representing her lost years. The third, still in progress, would show the rebirth. "I can't finish it," Liana said one night, standing before the incomplete third panel. "I don't know what the reborn phoenix looks like." "Maybe that's the point," Aurora suggested. "Maybe it's always in process, never complete." Liana turned to look at her daughter, paint-stained and exhausted, but suddenly illuminated with understanding. "You're right. The third panel isn't an ending, it's a becoming." She worked through the night, and when Alistair and Aurora found her the next morning, the painting was complete. The reborn phoenix was captured mid-transformation, part flame, part feather, part pure light, eternally becoming something new. "It's perfect," Alistair breathed. "It's true," Liana corrected. That's better than perfect. The exhibition opened on a rainy April evening, exactly 6 months after the restaurant encounter that had changed everything. The gallery was packed, art critics, trauma survivors, curious society figures, and media from around the world. Liana stood before the crowd, no longer the uncertain woman who'd first learned her identity 6 months ago. She'd integrated herself not into who she'd been or who she'd become, but into who she was becoming. This exhibition is called Dialogue, she began. Not because my past and present are having a conversation, but because we all are with our former selves, our trauma, our transformations. Every piece here represents a negotiation between who we were and who we're becoming. I invite you to see not the tragedy of memory lost, but the triumph of identity evolved. As people moved through the gallery, Liana watched their reactions. Some cried at the paintings depicting her confusion and loss. Others smiled at the pieces showing discovery and hope. The triptych drew crowds, people standing before it in silent contemplation. Rebecca Chen, the journalist who'd written their story for Vanity Fair, approached with tears in her eyes. "The third panel," she said. "The becoming. It's all of us, isn't it? We're all constantly transforming whether we've had trauma or not." "That's what I finally understood," Liana said. "I was so focused on what I'd lost that I couldn't see what I was gaining, the chance to consciously choose who I want to be." As the evening progressed, Liana noticed a woman standing alone before one of her early paintings, a portrait of a mother and child she'd painted while pregnant with Aurora. The woman was crying silently. Liana approached her. "Are you all right?" The woman turned, revealing a face marked by its own trauma-burned scars along one side. "I'm sorry. It's just your story. My husband doesn't remember me since his accident. The doctors say he never will. I've been mourning our marriage, but seeing this reading about you, maybe I need to stop mourning and start building something new with who he is now." "It's not easy," Liana said honestly. "There are days I still grieve who I was, but there are more days when I'm grateful for who I'm becoming." The woman smiled through her tears. "Thank you. For the art, for the story, for the hope." As she walked away, Aurora appeared at Liana's side. "You're helping people, Mom, just like you always wanted." "We're helping people," Liana corrected. "This family, this strange, broken, rebuilt family, we're showing others that broken doesn't mean worthless." The exhibition was a tremendous success, critically and commercially. Every piece sold with proceeds going to the foundation. But more importantly, it sparked a conversation about identity, memory, and the resilience of the human spirit. That night, as they returned to the penthouse, exhausted but exhilarated, they found Margaret Donnelly waiting in the lobby. "Margaret," Liana said, surprised. "Is everything okay?" The elderly woman smiled. "I came to give you something. I've been waiting for the right time, and after seeing your exhibition, I think that time is now." She handed Liana a worn envelope. Inside was a single photograph, Liana in a hospital bed, holding newborn Aurora, her face bandaged, but her eyes fierce with protective love. "I took this the day Aurora was born," Margaret explained. "You couldn't remember who you were, but you knew who you needed to be a mother. That's when I knew you'd survive no matter what." Liana stared at the photo, seeing herself at her most vulnerable yet strongest moment. "This is who I really am," she whispered. "Not the society wife, not the struggling single mother, but this a survivor who chooses love despite not understanding why." "You've always known who you were," Margaret said gently. "You just needed time to remember not the facts, but the truth." As they rode the elevator up to the penthouse, Liana held the photo against her heart. 20 years collapsed into a single moment of understanding. She might never remember being Liana Sterling, but she knew who she was, a phoenix constantly rising, constantly becoming, constantly choosing to love despite the ashes. The photograph Margaret had given them became a talisman of sorts, framed and placed on the mantel, where it caught the morning light. Liana often found herself drawn to it, studying the woman she'd been in that hospital bed, lost, damaged, but fiercely determined to protect the life she'd brought into the world. It was during one of these contemplative moments that Aurora found her 3 weeks after the exhibition's triumph. The younger woman's face was troubled, her usual confidence shaken by something she clutched in her hands. "Mom, we need to talk," Aurora said, her voice unnaturally formal. Liana turned from the photograph, immediately alert to her daughter's distress. "What's wrong?" Aurora held out a thick envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "This came to my office today. Addressed to me personally, marked confidential. It's from someone named Vincent Zhao." The name meant nothing to Liana, but she saw Alistair stiffen from across the room, where he'd been reviewing contracts. He set down his papers and approached them slowly, his face grave. "Vincent Zhao," he said carefully, "was Julian's personal attorney before everything happened." "Was?" Aurora asked. "He disappeared after Julian's arrest. We assumed he'd fled the country to avoid being implicated." Alistair reached for the envelope. "May I?" Aurora nodded, and he opened it, pulling out several documents and photographs. As he scanned them, his face went pale, then flushed with anger. "What is it?" Liana demanded. Alistair handed her the papers with shaking hands. "Vincent didn't just handle Julian's legal affairs. He was watching you. Both of you. For 20 years. The documents were surveillance reports, detailed accounts of Liana and Aurora's lives as Amelia and Alara Vance. School reports, medical records, photographs taken from a distance showing them at the library, the park, their small apartment in Queens. Every milestone, every struggle meticulously documented. "He knew," Liana whispered, horror dawning. "Julian knew we were alive all along." "No," Alistair said, reading further. "Vincent knew. He never told Julian. Listen to this." He read from a handwritten letter, "Miss Sterling. By the time you read this, I will be beyond the reach of American law. I write not seeking forgiveness, but offering truth. In October 2004, Julian Sterling hired me to ensure his cousin's wife died in an accident. I arranged the mechanical failures, the route change, everything. But I also followed the car, intending to confirm the death. I saw the crash. I saw your mother thrown clear before the fire. I saw the old woman stop and take her to safety. I could have finished what Julian paid me to do. Instead, I chose to watch, to document, to keep the secret. Why, call it conscience, call it cowardice, call it my own insurance policy against Julian. I reported to him that Liana Sterling was dead, showed him the burned body we'd prepared. But I kept watching you both year after year, building a file that could destroy him if needed. I'm not proud of what I've done. But I want you to know that every birthday photo, every school achievement, every moment of struggle, I documented. I also made sure certain obstacles disappeared. The scholarship that came through at the last minute. The apartment that suddenly became available when you were evicted. The anonymous donation to your mother's medical bills. That was blood money trying to balance scales that could never be balanced. There's more. Evidence I gathered over the years about Julian's other crimes. Account numbers, victim names, a broader conspiracy than anyone imagined. I've included everything. Do with it what you will. I don't ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know the truth. Your survival wasn't just luck or Margaret Donnelly's kindness. It was also my one act of mercy in a life otherwise devoted to darkness. Vincent Zhao. The room was silent except for Aurora's harsh breathing. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window. He watched us. All those years thinking we were alone, struggling, and someone was watching, documenting, playing God with our lives. He also protected you, Alistair said quietly. In his twisted way, he kept you safe. Safe, Aurora whirled on him. We lived in poverty. Mom worked 3 jobs. I went to bed hungry sometimes. Where was his protection then? Aurora, Liana said gently, but her daughter's anger had been unleashed. No. Don't you see we were puppets? Julian pulled strings to kill you. This Vincent pulled strings to save you, and we just danced along never knowing. How is that different from being dead? We had no agency, no choice. We had every choice, Liana interrupted firmly. Yes, Vincent was watching. Yes, he occasionally intervened. But every decision I made as Amelia, every sacrifice, every moment of love I gave you, that was real. That was mine. No one pulled those strings. She moved to her daughter, taking her face in her hands. We are not defined by those who watched us or manipulated circumstances around us. We're defined by how we responded, how we survived, how we loved, despite everything. Aurora's anger crumbled into tears. I thought our story was ours. Now it feels like even our survival was orchestrated. Look at me, Liana commanded. The man who tried to kill us is in prison. The man who watched us is gone. But we're here. We're together. We won. Not because of them, but despite them. Alistair had been reading through the additional documents Vincent had provided. His expression grew increasingly grim. This is bigger than just us, he said. Vincent documented everything. Julian wasn't just embezzling. He was involved in human trafficking, money laundering, contract killings. He used Sterling Industries as a front for massive criminal operations. My God, Liana breathed. How did no one know? Because he was careful. And because Vincent was brilliant at covering tracks. Alistair held up a flash drive that had been in the envelope. This supposedly contains everything financial records recordings enough to implicate dozens of other people. We have to take this to the FBI, Aurora said immediately. We will. But first, we need to protect ourselves. If this is as extensive as Vincent claims, there are people who won't want this information coming to light. Dangerous people. As if summoned by his words, Alistair's phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Chen. Mr. Sterling. Chen's voice was tense. We have a situation. 3 bodies were found in the Hudson this morning. All former associates of Julian Sterling. All mentioned in documents that were anonymously sent to my office an hour ago. Alistair's eyes met Liana's. Vincent's cleaning house, he said quietly. Vincent Zhao, we have him listed as missing. Not missing, running, and apparently tying up loose ends before he goes. Alistair looked at the flash drive. Detective, we need protection, and we need to meet immediately. Within an hour, their penthouse had become a fortress. FBI agents stationed throughout the building, cybersecurity experts examining the flash drive, and Detective Chen coordinating with federal authorities. Aurora sat between her parents, the reality of the danger finally sinking in. I've put you both at risk, Alistair said. My connection to Julian, to this company. Our connection, Liana corrected. We're a family. Your risks are our risks. Special Agent Rivera, leading the FBI team, emerged from Alistair's study where they'd been reviewing Vincent's files. Her face was grave. This is one of the most extensive criminal networks we've uncovered in decades, she said. Julian Sterling was just one piece. There are connections to international crime syndicates, corrupt officials, even judges. Mr. Zhao's documentation is thorough and damning. So what happens now? Aurora asked. Now we move you to a safe house while we process this information and make arrests. This is going to take weeks, possibly months. You'll need to disappear for a while. No, Liana said firmly. We've spent 20 years hiding even if we didn't know it. We're not running again. Mrs. Sterling, with respect, you don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly. These people tried to kill me once. They succeeded in stealing 2 decades of my life. But if we run now, if we hide, they win again. We have the evidence. We have protection. We stand and fight. Rivera looked to Alistair for support, but he was studying his wife with something like awe. She's right, he said. We've been victims long enough. It's time to be survivors. Rivera sighed. If you stay, you'll need to maintain normal routines as much as possible while we investigate. Any deviation might alert remaining network members that we're onto them. Can you do that? Pretend everything is normal while knowing you're potentially in danger. I pretended to be someone else for 20 years without knowing it, Liana said. I think I can manage a few weeks of conscious performance. The next morning, they attempted normalcy. Alistair went to the office, to Liana to her studio, Aurora to her classes at Columbia, where she'd enrolled in an MBA program. Each had discreet security, but to outside observers, life continued as usual. It was Aurora who noticed the first anomaly. Sitting in her corporate finance class, she recognized a new student in the back row, one of the men from Vincent's surveillance photos, someone who'd been watching them years ago. She texted her security detail immediately, but continued taking notes as if nothing was wrong. The man made no aggressive moves, just sat and watched. When class ended, he disappeared into the crowd before security could intercept him. It's a message, Agent Rivera said when they convened that evening. Someone knows we have Vincent's files. They're letting us know they're watching. Let them watch, Liana said defiantly. Let them see us refusing to be intimidated. But the watching intensified. Unmarked cars outside the penthouse. Strange faces at Alistair's meetings. Someone had broken into Liana's queen's apartment, still technically hers, though she rarely visited, and left a phoenix feather on the kitchen table. They're trying to spook us, Alistair said, studying the feather. Make us run or make mistakes. Or they're waiting for something, Aurora suggested. She'd inherited her father's strategic mind and her mother's intuition. Vincent said he was cleaning house. What if there are others doing the same? What if this is bigger than just Julian's network? Her instinct proved correct. 3 days later, Vincent Zhao's body was found in a hotel room in Bangkok, apparent suicide but circumstances suspicious. The same day, 6 more former associates of Julian's were arrested trying to flee the country. The network was collapsing, turning on itself. It's like dominoes, Rivera explained. Vincent's files exposed everyone, so now they're all scrambling to make deals or eliminate threats. You 3 are the center of it, the victims whose story started this unraveling. Some want you silenced, others want you protected to ensure their own deals go through. So we're pawns again, Aurora said bitterly. No, Alistair said firmly. We're the queens on this chessboard. Everyone else is scrambling because of us, because of our truth. That's not powerlessness, that's the ultimate power. That night, unable to sleep, Liana found herself painting. Not the careful, planned pieces for exhibitions, but raw, emotional work. She painted Vincent Zhao as she imagined him, a shadow figure watching from darkness, hands red with blood, but reaching toward light. She painted Julian in his prison cell, surrounded by the ghosts of his crimes. She painted herself fractured but whole, standing between her two lives. Aurora found her at dawn, covered in paint, surrounded by a dozen canvases. "Mom, these are—" She paused, searching for words. "They're terrifying and beautiful." "They're true," Liana said simply. "I'm tired of performed normalcy, of pretending this isn't affecting us. We're in the middle of something monstrous, and I need to process it. Through art, through truth. That's what art is, isn't it? Truth made visible." Aurora studied the paintings, particularly one showing a young girl herself surrounded by invisible watchers, oblivious but somehow protected. "We were never really alone," she said softly. "Even in our worst moments, someone was watching. I can't decide if that's comforting or horrifying." "Both," Liana said. "Most truths are." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, the doctor who'd falsified the death records 20 years ago, reached out through his lawyer. He'd been in witness protection, but was willing to testify in exchange for immunity. "I have recordings," he told them when they met in a secure federal facility. Julian was paranoid, but not paranoid enough. He recorded conversations for blackmail, but I recorded him recording. 20 years of evidence hidden in a safety deposit box. The recordings were damning. Julian discussing the murder plot, the body switch, the insurance fraud. But more importantly, they revealed the full scope of the network names, dates, crimes that spanned decades. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Alistair asked, barely controlling his rage. Webb looked old, broken. "Fear, greed, cowardice. Pick your poison. But when I saw the news about your reunion, about your family surviving despite everything, I couldn't carry it anymore." "You let us suffer for 20 years, Liana said quietly. "I don't forgive you. I don't expect forgiveness. I expect justice, even if it destroys me too." The recordings changed everything. Within 48 hours, arrests were made across 3 countries. The network collapsed completely, its members turning on each other in desperate bids for leniency. The danger to the Sterling family evaporated as everyone scrambled to save themselves. But the emotional toll was heavy. Aurora struggled with trust, questioning every relationship, wondering who might be watching, recording, manipulating. Alistair threw himself into work, trying to salvage Sterling Industries' reputation after its unwitting use in criminal operations. And Liana painted. Her new series, born from those sleepless nights, was darker than anything she'd created before. But there was light in them too, threads of gold through shadow phoenixes rising from crime scenes, flowers growing from surveillance photos. "You're processing," Dr. Reeves observed during one of their sessions. "Not memories, but trauma. Fresh trauma layered over old." "I feel like I'm drowning in other people's sins," Liana admitted. "Julian's, Vincent's, Webb's. All these people who played with our lives like we were dolls." "But you're not drowning," Reeves pointed out. "You're painting. You're transforming their darkness into your art. That's not drowning, that's alchemy." The trial preparations began in earnest. With Julian already imprisoned, these new trials focused on the network he'd operated within. Liana, Alistair, and Aurora would all need to testify their story, the heart of the prosecution's case. "I don't want to be a victim in that courtroom," Aurora said the night before her first testimony. "I don't want them to see me as the poor girl who grew up without a father." "Then don't be," Alistair said. "Be the woman who survived it, who thrived despite it, who stands here now whole and strong and unbroken." "We're all broken," Aurora replied. "The difference is we're not destroyed." Her testimony was powerful. She spoke clearly without tears about growing up as Alara Vance, about her mother's strength, their struggles, their small triumphs, About the shock of discovering her true identity, the joy of finding her father, the horror of learning about those who'd watched them. "They thought they controlled our story," she said, looking directly at the defendants. "They were wrong. My mother and I wrote our own story page by page, day by day. We were the authors, not them. They were just footnotes." When Liana testified, she brought her paintings. Not the beautiful ones from before, or the hopeful ones from her exhibition, but the dark ones born from recent trauma. She set them up in the courtroom, forcing everyone to see the truth made visible. "This is what you did," she said simply. "Not just to me, but to the fabric of reality around us. You turned life into surveillance love, into leveraged trust, into a weapon. But here's what you didn't understand. Phoenixes are born from fire. You burned us, but we rose." Alistair's testimony was different. Cold, precise, devastating. He laid out the financial crimes with mathematical precision, showing how the network had operated, how much they'd stolen, how many lives they'd destroyed beyond just his family. "You want to know the real crime," he said at the end. "It's not the money or even the attempted murder. It's the theft of time. 20 years I can never get back with my wife. 20 years of my daughter's life missed. 20 years of memories that should exist but don't. You can imprison the guilty, recover the money, even attempt restitution. But you can never give us back the time." The verdicts were unanimous. Guilty on all counts. The network was dismantled, its members facing decades in prison. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But that night, as they sat in the penthouse watching the news coverage, none of them felt celebratory. "It doesn't fix anything," Aurora said quietly. "They're going to prison, but Mom still can't remember. We still lost those years." "No," Liana said, surprising them. "It doesn't fix the past, but it clears the path to the future. No more shadows watching. No more puppet strings. For the first time in 20 years, maybe longer, we're truly free." She stood walking to the window where the city sparkled below. "I want to do something. Something probably crazy." "What?" Alistair asked, though he was already smiling, recognizing the determination in her voice. "I want to get married. Again. Or for the first time since I don't remember the first time. I want to choose you publicly, consciously, without any shadows or secrets or surveillance. I want our daughter to be there to see her parents choose each other despite everything." Aurora gasped. "Mom, are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we reclaim our narrative," Liana said, turning to face them. "We've been reactive for so long, responding to crimes, revelations, trials. I want to be proactive. I want to create a moment that's entirely ours." Alistair crossed to her, taking her hands. "Liana, Amelia Sterling Vance, or whoever you choose to be, will you marry me again, for the first time, for the last time?" "Only if Aurora is our maid of honor and best woman simultaneously," Liana said, tears streaming down her face. "Deal," Aurora said, joining their embrace. "But I'm planning this wedding. You two have been through enough. Let me give you something beautiful." The wedding was set for June 3rd. Aurora's birthday, the day that had kept them connected even when they didn't know each other, existed. But this story, this portion of their journey, wasn't really about the wedding. It was about the choice to move forward, to stop being defined by those who'd wronged them, to become authors of their own narrative. As spring arrived and wedding preparations began, Liana stood in her studio, surrounded by her paintings past and present in dialogue. She picked up her brush and began a new piece. Not a phoenix this time, but a garden. Things growing wild and free without surveillance, without manipulation. just life doing what life does, persisting, thriving, blooming, despite the ashes in the soil. "What will you call it?" Aurora asked, watching her mother work. Liana smiled, adding a burst of gold to represent sunrise. "Beginning. Just beginning." Outside, New York hummed with its usual chaos, unaware that in one penthouse a family was finally truly beginning to heal. Not from memory recovered, but from choices made, not from justice served, but from love chosen again and again despite the odds. The phoenix had risen, but more importantly, it had learned to soar on its own terms, writing its flight path across a sky that belonged to no one but itself. The morning of June 3rd dawned clear and bright sunlight streaming through the windows of the Hamptons estate, where they'd chosen to hold the ceremony. Aurora stood in her childhood bedroom, though she'd never actually lived here as a child, helping her mother with the final touches of preparation. The ivory dress Liana wore was simple but elegant, nothing like the elaborate gown from the wedding photos she couldn't remember. "You're shaking," Aurora observed, steadying her mother's hands as she attempted to fasten the phoenix bracelet. "I'm terrified," Liana admitted with a laugh that bordered on tears. "Isn't that ridiculous? You have faced attempted murder, amnesia, criminal trials, and I'm scared of a wedding." "It's not ridiculous," Aurora said softly. "Those other things happened to you. This is something you're choosing. Choice is always scarier than circumstance." Liana turned to study her daughter, radiant in her deep blue dress. "When did you become so wise?" "I had a good teacher. A woman who raised me alone while fighting battles she couldn't even remember." A knock at the door interrupted them. Grace Chen entered carrying a small wrapped box. "This came for you this morning. No return address, but security cleared it." Liana unwrapped it carefully, revealing an antique music box. When she opened it, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major began to play, and inside was a single photograph, young Liana and Alistair, at what appeared to be a college party, laughing clearly in love but not yet together. The note read, "I took this at Harvard, spring of 1999. You two didn't know I was watching, didn't know you were destined for each other. Sometimes the best stories are the ones we don't see coming. Be happy. Margaret Donnelly." "She knew you both even then?" Aurora asked, amazed. "I was her student," a voice said from the doorway. Margaret herself stood there, walker replaced with an elegant cane. "Nursing school, advanced trauma care. Brightest student I ever had until she fell in love with that business major and decided art was her calling instead." Liana stared at her pieces clicking into place. "You weren't randomly driving by that night. You were looking for me." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I'd heard about the accident on the scanner. I knew the route you'd be taking. I couldn't let my best student die even if she'd forgotten I existed." "But I don't remember you at all," Liana said desperately. "You wouldn't. The trauma erased everything, not just the accident. But I remembered you. I've watched you rebuild yourself twice now, once as Amelia, once as whatever beautiful hybrid you're becoming. Each time you've exceeded my wildest hopes." Before Liana could respond, Margaret pressed something into her hand, a small silver pin in the shape of a phoenix. "You gave this to me when you left nursing school," Margaret explained. "Said you wanted me to remember that people can transform, can rise from one life to another. Seems fitting you should have it back today." Liana pinned it to her dress with trembling fingers. "Will you walk me down the aisle? I know it's unconventional, but—" "I'd be honored," Margaret said immediately. "After all, I've been walking beside you for longer than either of us realized." In his study, Alistair adjusted his tie for the 5th time, while Tom Richardson, his best man and oldest friend, watched with amusement. "You're more nervous than the first wedding," Tom observed. The first wedding was about hope, Alistair replied. This one is about choice. Conscious, deliberate choice despite knowing how much it can hurt to lose someone. But you didn't lose her. Not really. I lost one version of her. Now I'm marrying another. And honestly, Tom... Alistair turned from the mirror. I think I love this version more. She's stronger, fiercer. She chose me without memories telling her she should. That's everything. Tom studied his friend, seeing peace in his face for the first time in 20 years. You know what this really is? It's not a second chance. It's a first chance at a second life. Before Alistair could respond, Detective Chen knocked and entered. Sorry to intrude, but there's something you should know. Julian wants to attend the wedding. Absolutely not, Tom said immediately, but Alistair held up a hand. From prison. He's requested a supervised release for the day. Says he wants to make amends to see you happy. The judge is actually considering it, given his cooperation with the investigation. Alistair was quiet for a long moment, then picked up his phone and called Liana. Her voice was steady when she answered. I heard, she said before he could speak. Grace told me. What do you think? I think it's your day too. Your choice. There was a pause, then Liana said something that surprised everyone. Let him come. Liana, no, listen. He's spent 20 years in his own prison of jealousy and hate. Maybe seeing us happy, seeing what survived despite him, maybe that's the real justice. Or maybe I just want him to see that he failed completely. That love won. Are you sure? I'm sure that I don't want to spend our wedding day giving him power by fearing his presence. He's nothing to us now. Just a sad footnote in our story. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset, but guests began arriving by mid-afternoon. The garden had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses, the same flowers from their original wedding, mixed with phoenix lilies that Aurora had specially ordered. The aisle was lined with candles in hurricane glass, and at the altar stood an arch of intertwined branches symbolizing two lives growing together. Julian arrived in shackles, 2 federal marshals at his sides. He was seated in the very back row, his presence causing whispers, until Alistair himself walked over. Thank you for letting me come, Julian said quietly, his voice hollow. I needed to see this, to understand what I tried to destroy. You're not here for forgiveness, Alistair said coldly. You're here to witness what love looks like when it's not poisoned by greed. Julian nodded, accepting the judgment. As Alistair walked away, Julian called out softly, She looks happy. Different but happy. Maybe happier than before. Alistair paused, but didn't turn around. She is. We all are. Because we chose it. The music began, a string quartet playing not the traditional wedding march, but a piece Aurora had composed, a blend of classical and modern, past and present in harmony. First came Aurora herself, radiant as both maid of honor and best woman, carrying a bouquet of phoenix lilies. Then the music shifted to Chopin's Nocturne, and Liana appeared on Margaret's arm. The gathered guests gasped. She was luminous, not trying to recreate the bride from 20 years ago, but fully embodying who she'd become. The phoenix pin caught the light, the bracelet gleamed on her wrist, and her eyes, those honey-colored eyes that had survived everything, locked onto Alistair's. As she walked down the aisle, memories flickered through the crowd. Rebecca Chen, the journalist, wiping tears as she saw the story she'd chronicled reaching its new chapter. Dr. Reeves, smiling at the integration of identity she'd witnessed. Grace, Tom, and others who'd watched Alistair's 20-year grief now seeing its transformation into joy. When Liana reached the altar, Margaret kissed her cheek and whispered, "Rise, Phoenix, rise and soar." The officiant, Judge Harrison, who had sentenced Julian, began the ceremony with words they'd written together. We gather today not for a beginning, but for a continuation. This couple has been married, separated by violence, reunited by chance, and now chooses to bind themselves again, not in recovery of what was, but in celebration of what is and what will be. Alistair spoke first, his vows memorized, but his voice thick with emotion. Liana, I fell in love with you twice. First, with the woman you were brilliant, kind, full of light. Then with the woman you became strong, resilient, choosing love without memory's guidance. You say you don't remember our first wedding, but I do, and I can tell you this, that young man loved his bride, but not with the depth I love you now. Because now I know what it's like to lose you, to find you, to be chosen by you, despite impossible odds. You are my phoenix, constantly rising, constantly transforming, constantly choosing to love despite the ashes. Liana's hands trembled as she spoke her vows, written and rewritten a dozen times. Alistair, I stand here as a paradox, your wife of 21 years, and a woman meeting you for the first time. I don't have memories of falling in love with you, but I have something more powerful, the choice to love you now freely, without the weight of history telling me I should. Every morning I wake up and choose you again, not because I remember yesterday, but because I want tomorrow. You waited for me for 20 years, loved a ghost, mourned an absence. Now I promise you presence, full, conscious, chosen presence. Aurora stepped forward, then surprising everyone by speaking. As the daughter you made and lost and found, I want to add something. This family wasn't built on memory, but on choice. Every day we choose to be who we are to each other. Dad, you chose to love a woman who doesn't remember you. Mom, you chose to trust a stranger who claimed to be your husband. And you both chose to include me, to make me not just your daughter, but your bridge between past and future. So I stand here as witness, not to a marriage, but to a choice renewed daily to be a family, despite everything that tried to break us. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Julian, in his back row prison shackles, wept silently. The rings, Judge Harrison said softly. Alistair removed the phoenix ring he'd worn for 21 years, placing it in Aurora's hand. Liana removed her bracelet, the one that had started everything, and did the same. These symbols have traveled through time, through trauma, through transformation, the judge continued. Now exchange them anew, not as reminders of what was, but as promises of what will be. Alistair took the bracelet and fastened it on Liana's wrist. With this phoenix, I promise to rise with you again and again, no matter how many times we must rebuild. Liana slipped the ring onto his finger. With this phoenix, I promise to choose you again and again, no matter what I remember or forget. By the power vested in me, and by the power of your extraordinary love, I pronounce you husband and wife again and always. You may kiss your bride. As Alistair pulled Liana close, the setting sun broke through the trees, bathing them in golden light. The kiss was different from their first wedding, deeper, more knowing, carrying the weight of loss and the lightness of redemption simultaneously. The reception was held under a tent strung with thousands of tiny lights, like stars brought down to earth. The first dance was to Chopin's Nocturne, of course, but played live by a pianist who'd been one of Liana's students at the library. I don't remember our first dance, Liana whispered as they swayed together, but this one feels like coming home. Maybe because home isn't a memory, Alistair replied. It's a feeling, and you've always been my home even when you were lost. As other couples joined them on the dance floor, Aurora danced with Tom Richardson, who'd become something of an uncle to her. Margaret sat at a table with Dr. Reeves, the two medical professionals, discussing the miraculous nature of the human brain's ability to heal. It was Grace who noticed Julian being escorted out early, But not before he left something on the gift table, a small envelope addressed to Aurora. She opened it later privately, finding a single key and a note. Storage Unit 12B Queens. Your mother's artwork from college pieces I saved before I became a monster. Let beauty survive even when the person who hoarded it doesn't deserve redemption. J.S. Aurora showed it to her parents the next day after the guests had gone, and they were sitting on the beach behind the estate, still in their wedding clothes, but barefoot in the sand. We should burn them, Alistair said immediately. No, Liana said thoughtfully. We should see them. They're not his paintings. They're mine. Another piece of who I was returned. The storage unit, when they visited it a week later, was a time capsule. Dozens of canvases from Liana's college years, pieces she'd painted before she knew Alistair, before marriage, before everything. They were raw, unrefined, but bursting with potential. Look at this one, Aurora said, pulling out a painting of a woman transforming into a bird. You were painting phoenixes even then. Some themes persist, Liana said, studying her younger self's work. Even when we don't remember why we're drawn to them. They donated most of the paintings to the foundation, but Liana kept one, a self-portrait, from when she was 20, eyes full of dreams she couldn't have imagined would lead here. She had no idea what was coming, Liana said, hanging it in her studio next to her recent work. The love, the loss, the resurrection. Would you warn her if you could? Alistair asked. Liana considered the question. No, because then she might not take the risks, might not fall in love with you, might not have Aurora, might not become who I am now. The price was terrible, but the reward. She looked at her family. The reward was worth it. 6 months after the wedding, Liana had her first true memory. Not a recovery of lost time, but a sudden, vivid flash of the past breaking through. She was painting in her studio when the smell of oil paint and turpentine suddenly transported her. She was 23 again, in a different studio, and Alistair was there watching her paint, reading stock reports aloud while she worked, because he liked being near her, even when they were doing different things. You always read to me, she said, when he came home that evening. While I painted. Stock reports, quarterly earnings, the most boring things imaginable, but I loved your voice. Alistair froze. You remember? A fragment. Just a moment. But it was real, wasn't it? Every Sunday morning, he confirmed, tears in his eyes. You said my voice was your favorite background music. The memories came sporadically after that, triggered by sensory experiences. The taste of a particular wine brought back their honeymoon in Tuscany. A song on the radio recovered a road trip to Vermont, ironically, the same trip where she'd died and been reborn. Each memory was a gift, but Liana was careful not to depend on them. I'm not trying to become her again, she told Dr. Reeves. I'm just grateful to meet her occasionally. Aurora graduated from Columbia that spring, with her MBA immediately taking a position at Sterling Industries. But her real passion project was the book she'd been secretly writing, not about their story, which had been told enough, but about identity, memory, and the choice to love without guarantees. It's called The Phoenix's Daughter, she told her parents, handing them the manuscript. It's not about us exactly. It's about everyone who's had to rebuild themselves, who's chosen love despite not knowing the outcome. The book would become a bestseller, but that was still in the future. For now, it was just a daughter's attempt to make sense of a story that defied sense. On a cold December evening, almost 2 years after that fateful night at Le Bernardin, the three of them stood in Liana's latest exhibition. This one was different from the others, not about trauma or recovery, but about joy. Paintings of their new life, their second chance, their chosen family. The centerpiece was a massive canvas showing 3 phoenixes in flight, their wings intertwined, soaring toward a sun that looked suspiciously like a wedding ring. "We did it," Aurora said quietly, standing between her parents. "We actually did it. We took the worst thing that could happen and turned it into something beautiful." "We didn't turn it into anything," Liana corrected. "We chose to see the beauty that was always there, waiting to be discovered." A young woman approached them, nervous but determined. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm Sarah Chen, no relation to Grace. I lost my memory in an accident 5 years ago. My family says I'm different now that I'm not who I was. Seeing your story, your art, it gives me hope that different doesn't mean less than." Liana took the woman's hands. "Different means evolved. You're not who you were, but you're who you're becoming. And that person, the one who survived, who's rebuilding, who's choosing to continue despite not remembering that person, is magnificent." As Sarah walked away, visibly moved, Alistair pulled his wife and daughter close. "You know what I realized," he said. "We spent so much time focused on what we lost that we almost missed what we gained. Not just getting each other back, but becoming who we are now. I wouldn't trade this version of us for anything, not even recovered memories." "The price of wisdom is often pain," Liana said. "But the reward is understanding that we're not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to rise." Outside, snow began to fall over Manhattan, each flake unique, unrepeatable, perfect in its imperfection. Inside the gallery, surrounded by art, born from ashes, 3 phoenixes continued their eternal rise, not toward who they were, but toward who they were always meant to become. The story could end here with redemption achieved and family restored. But life, unlike fiction, doesn't really end, it transforms. And for the Sterling family, the greatest transformation was yet to come. It started with a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday. Aurora was in her office at Sterling Industries when her assistant knocked. "There's a woman here to see you. Says she's from the Phoenix Foundation. Something about a discovery in Vermont." The woman who entered was elderly but sharp-eyed, carrying a box of weathered documents. "Miss Sterling, I'm Patricia Morse. I've been researching closed hospitals for the Foundation, looking for records of amnesia patients. I found something at Mercy General's archived files that I think you need to see." She pulled out a medical file thick with 20-year-old papers. But what caught Aurora's attention was the photo clipped to the front, a young woman unconscious, bandaged, but unmistakably her mother. "This is Mom's file from when she was found," Aurora said. "Look closer," Patricia urged. "At the date of admission." Aurora looked. October 15th, 2004, 11:47 p.m. She knew that date, that time. It was when her mother's car had crashed. But there was something else, something that made her blood run cold. "This says she was admitted with a baby, a newborn. But I wasn't born until June." Patricia nodded grimly. "Keep reading." The notes were in Margaret Donnelly's handwriting. "Patient admitted with severe trauma, pregnant. Emergency C-section performed due to fetal distress. Twin A delivered successfully. Twin B remained in utero stable. Decision made to delay delivery to increase chances of survival." Aurora's hands shook. "Twins?" "There's more," Patricia said gently. "Look at the adoption papers." Another document signed by someone claiming to be Amelia Vance's sister, adopting the first twin. The signature was shaky but legible, Victoria Zhao. "Zhao," Aurora whispered. "As in Vincent Zhao. His wife. They raised the child as their own. The boy would be 20 now, same as you." Aurora grabbed her phone, calling her parents. They needed to know they had another child, a son who'd been hidden just like everything else in their twisted story. But as the phone rang, she couldn't shake the feeling that their family's resurrection wasn't complete. Somewhere out there was her twin raised by the man who'd helped orchestrate their mother's death. The phoenix had risen, but apparently, it had been carrying more than anyone knew. And now, 20 years later, another lost piece of their family was about to surface, bringing with it new questions, new challenges, and perhaps new redemptions. The phone connected, and Aurora heard her mother's voice, happy and unsuspecting. "Hi, sweetheart. How's your day?" Aurora closed her eyes, preparing to shatter their peace once again. But that's what phoenixes did, wasn't it? They burned and rose, each resurrection, revealing new truths, new possibilities, new chances to choose love over loss. "Mom," she said, "you need to sit down. There's something I have to tell you."